the Sun Prairie Historical Library and Museum. I am Sunshine Anderson. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm going to take you on a tour. So come on in. We'll go ahead and take a look first at our earliest people in the region, the Ho-Chunk. The Ho-Chunk name translates roughly to people of the big voice or people of a sacred voice. And we really look back in time, not only at them, but also at the Paleo native people who were here long before. So some of the artifacts we have on display in this area are some hand-woven baskets where we highlight black ash, a tree native to Wisconsin that was used frequently. We also have this really neat exhibit that just got installed. It was a collaboration with the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Department of Anthropology. We had a couple students who came and took a look at our lithics or our rock tool collection here, and they were able to give us a lot more detailed information. So more than you can take in a video, you'll have to come check it out. So behind me here we have Sun Prairie's founding story. Sun Prairie was founded in 1839, but it was named in 1837. This gentleman here, Augustus Bird, he had several brothers out in New York State by the time that he was named one of the three commissioners for the new territorial capitol building project. So we had just decided Madison was going to become our territorial capital, eventually our state capital, and this was one of the fellows who organized the work on that. He and his brothers traveled to Milwaukee, and before it was Milwaukee, actually, it's a little bit of a history fun fact there. It was actually three different communities that eventually would merge to become Milwaukee. But anyhow, they make their way from Milwaukee to Madison. They go through days of pouring rain, and when they get to the land that Sun Prairie is on, that's when the clouds parted, the sun came out, and you guessed it, Sun Prairie. So they go on and they do their work, and 2 years later, one of the younger brothers, Charles Bird, comes on back and builds his home on the site that we're currently in. So our building has some pretty cool ties as well. All right, so over here we have a case of some of our newest donations. On the far left, we have a watercolor by a local artist who actually made a larger donation, including some silk painted vests, which was really something special to bring into our collections here. We always, of course, look for family histories and have the Lister family's photos currently on display. We typically don't display original photos in the museum world because we want to preserve them, but in this case, since it's out for a short while, we thought we'd let folks see the originals. Here we have a sulky racing outfit. So this was worn at Angel Park, which is just southeast of the museum here. It's one of our oldest parks in the city, and this was a form of horse racing where the rider would sit in a chariot behind, well, sort of a chariot, sort of a backwards chariot, more of a little, I don't know what you call it, maybe a wagon or what have you.
Just a cart?
Cart, that might be a better word for it. So anyhow, they would sit behind the horse and race, and this was worn during races at Angel Park. And over here we have a scrapbook by somebody who organized the Groundhog Ball. We take Groundhog Day very seriously here in Sun Prairie, so this was a really neat collection to come in as well, really bringing in the residents' perspective on what was going on at the time, and including some really cool little tidbits of trivia that we can draw on. We also like to educate our visitors about the early economy and how Sun Prairie grew to be the size that it is. Sun Prairie today is one of the fastest growing communities in Wisconsin, and that's nothing new for us. We have grown so much, and even from our outset, we only had one census, I believe, where we actually decreased in population in the late 1800s, and then we picked right back up. So it was the arrival of the railroad in 1859 that really spurred our growth in our beautiful historic downtown. Over here we have some enlarged images that used to be in exhibits that we give away to our visitors. When you pick them up, you can learn a little something about the image. We have a description printed on the back there, and folks take these to make art, to just display. Sometimes folks find relatives or even themselves in those photos. So that's a really neat way that we can make this accessible to the public. Our next exhibit here is Immigrants to Ambassadors, 200 Years of Norwegian Immigration, and we explore this story of the Loftus family pictured here. So we have Ole and Margit Loftus, and they brought 7 of their children over from Norway in 1885. The last one born in Norway was Edward, and Edward would go on to become the grandfather of a US ambassador back to Norway. So kind of a full circle story as we celebrate 200 years since the first ship arrived from Norway. Now the first folks who arrived, it was 6 families who were fleeing to practice their religion freely in the New World, but a lot of families came for different reasons. We'll get into that in a second. This beautiful piece here is from the family's trip in 1885. So this was called an America chest. Sometimes you hear about hope chests. Those are usually much larger, would carry more of the clothing and blankets and whatever linens maybe if you had them. And then this would have been more for important documents, money, jewelry, things that you could keep close. So that was a really neat piece that they've managed to preserve over the years. Over here, we take a look at the ship that the Loftus family crossed on, the SS Katy. They came, like I said, with 7 children. They had 2 more once they got to America. And what we found in our collections is actually a foghorn, very similar to what you would have found on the SS Katy. So this foghorn, it has a crank here on the side that you would be able to attach, and then you would force air through the horn using these bellows. And there would be a couple of these on each ship. And they could actually be closed up. There was another side to it and a handle on top so you could stow it away and protect it from all that salt water. All right, coming on over to our family, the Loftus family once again. We asked some of the big questions like why make the trip? So Norway was a primogeniture state, meaning that the oldest son would inherit the family's property, whether that's land, money, what have you. And typically these families were pretty large because they were farming. So what happened to the rest of those children? Well, with America opening up the West and saying we want more folks to come and settle here, that became a huge opportunity for folks in Norway looking for setting up their families in the long run. We'll show you a quick abbreviated Loftus family tree. So remember Ole and Margit? One of those children was Edward. We have the photograph of him as a young man. He married another child immigrant from Norway, and they had a child named Adolf. Adolf would become the father of Tom. Tom is who becomes our US ambassador to Norway. So you can kind of see it's not too far from the original family immigrating that we end up having that return, but it's also been 200 years. So once you got here, a lot of folks would be seeking citizenship, and some of the requirements were quite strict. They're very different from today's, but at the time they would have been a huge challenge too. You had to have lived in the US for 5 years, made a declaration 2 years prior to your application for citizenship that you intended to apply, and then you had to have other US citizens come and testify to your good moral character, and you had to swear your allegiance to the US Constitution and renounce all other nations, in this case particularly to the Kingdom of Norway. So some pretty neat documents there. We also touch on the stave churches that used to dot Scandinavia. There were over 1,000 of them, and today there are 28 preserved churches. So something really neat. I mean, just look at that. Just something very unique architecturally, and dating back to the medieval times, it was something that's really unique to Scandinavia. You see a stave church, you know where it is. So then coming through here, we focus more on Ambassador Loftus's experience. We touch on his political background. So he served as the Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly. He was the longest serving Democratic Speaker in the Assembly, and he eventually would run for governor in 1990. Unfortunately for him, he did not win, and he stepped away to teach for a bit before becoming the chair of Bill Clinton's Wisconsin campaign when he ran for president in 1992. So he gets that position, becoming President Clinton, and Tom Loftus goes to President Clinton and says, "I'd like to be your ambassador to Norway," to which President Clinton replied, "You'd be good at that." So then we come through here, you learn about Ambassador Loftus hosting First Lady Hillary Clinton and First Daughter Chelsea Clinton, as well as Flojo, or Florence Griffin Joyner, an Olympian.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, lots of folks remember her. So he had a lot of hosting responsibilities, a lot of International relationships he needed to maintain, whether they were with other folks in Norway or visitors to Norway who happen to be representing another country or state. We also have some examples of events held at Villa Otium, which is the name of the ambassador's residence in Oslo. This photograph here, you can see about 600 guests partying on the lawn there. That was for the 4th of July, so they did it right. And we also have some photographs of his interactions with royalty. He did have to interact with the king and queen of Norway, as they are a monarchy, albeit a relatively young monarchy in some senses. But we won't get into that today. You'll have to come and visit if you want a deeper story. Over here, we look at some of the items thanking Ambassador Loftus for his service. This is the Chief of Mission flag. This is the first time that this particular flag has been unfolded and displayed in its entirety. So this is reserved only for ambassadors, and it is quite an honor to receive that from the State Department. Now in here, talk about monarchy, we have from King Harold V, the Royal Norwegian Order of Merit. So this is the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a non-Norwegian national by the Norwegian state. Pretty neat to have something like that. We'll go ahead and pull open this drawer, and we'll see some more American artifacts here. So this is the guest book from Villa Otium, and it's open to a visit from former President Jimmy Carter and former First Lady Rosalind Carter. There's a photograph of President Carter with Carl Loftus, Ambassador Loftus's son. He had 2 sons living with him while he was in Norway, and I can only imagine what an experience that would have been. We also have a signed photograph from President Clinton and First Lady Clinton, and what Ambassador Loftus shared with us was that he could tell when it was President Clinton's original signature if the O was a little wonky. Kind of a funny little tidbit there. All right, and that takes us into our final exhibit room here on Georgia O'Keeffe. She was born here in 1887, about 7 minutes drive from where we're standing out in a more rural section of Sun Prairie. And she would go on to become the mother of American modernism. At one point, she was described as the most famous woman artist in America, and she would correct folks and say, no, I'm the most famous artist in America. So she really pushed the boundaries. She focused a lot on her abstract work early on. We have a print here of one of her early charcoal abstracts, which was highly unusual for women at the turn of the 20th century. They were expected to paint in watercolor. That was considered a more feminine art form, more forgiving. And they were expected to copy things that great artists had already created. But Georgia really wanted to create what she saw. And so we see that she takes a lot of her inspiration from nature, particularly flowers. She's really known well for her oversized flowers. But she also did a lot of work with the Southwest, the American Southwest. And so one of our touchable artifacts here, we have a cougar skull. So this wouldn't necessarily have been in her path, but she found much larger bones while she was walking around in New Mexico. And she took a lot of her inspiration from those sun-bleached bones and seeing the color and life around them. So Georgia O'Keeffe was here until her teenage years, at which point her family had already moved out east to Virginia. And this exhibit really dives into her relationship with her artwork, with her family, and with the city of Sun Prairie. I won't spoil that whole story, but the relationship with the city was not always very good. So you'll have to come and check this out to learn more. Also back here we have a research nook for folks who really like getting into Georgia's story. We have a bookcase here that is full of items in our collection, so sometimes harder to find titles that you wouldn't necessarily find at a public library, but visitors can pull these out and check them out while they're in here. We like to keep them safe so they stay in the building, but there is a lot of great information in here. So for folks who are interested in visiting the museum, we're located at 115 East Main Street here in downtown Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. We are open Wednesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. We are also open by appointment. You can email us at museum@cityofsunprairie.com. Our website, just so you can get all the information you could possibly need, is www.cityofsunprairie.com/museum. right, thank you so much. This is our 1899 or Columbus Street water tower. It is the first public works project completed in Sun Prairie. The downtown experienced a series of fires, and because the buildings were so close together, they needed some water source to put it out. We didn't have any nearby water sources to use. So they petitioned for and got this water tower.
Wow.
It is made out of reclaimed stone from a nearby mill that was taken down shortly before its construction. You can see we've got our markers here. It is on the National Register of Historic Places as of 2000. So let's take a peek inside.
Wow, this is great.
Yeah.
How tall is that?
About 92 feet tall.
Okay.
Yep, 60 feet up to the tank. The tank was originally wood, and you know what happens with wood and water.
Yeah.
There was a big incident, lots of water spilled.
Oh my gosh, look at this. This is awesome.
Yep, we cut off our access to the tank just so that we don't have any curious teenagers get a little too curious.
Sure.
But we do have our pipes still installed, and it's due for some tuck pointing and just some general maintenance this summer. A really cool feature you can notice around the walls in some points are these slits where they would have put lumber to create platforms so that they could continue working higher and higher, kind of their scaffolding. And then the water tower is no longer in service, and in the early 90s, they decided to disconnect it. And the question was, what do we do with this structure then? Do we tear it down? Or what do you do with this weird little chunk of land? It's on a little bit of a triangle here.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be useful for much of anything else. So there was a fundraiser where they sold bricks engraved out on our James Reininger Plaza. And they held a number of ice cream socials, concerts, that sort of thing to fundraise for it. And there was an entire water board preservation committee formed. It was quite a big deal here. And they were successful. And now it is considered the museum's largest artifact.
Yeah, this is phenomenal.